Welcome everybody to Next Level Snap. My name is Peaceful. I've got Lamby here with me. We are diving into the topic today of risk management. Before we get into it, I did want to mention, make sure if this is the content that you are enjoying, that you do subscribe to Lamby's channel. Make sure you like the video, comment down below some topics you'd like to see, and sort of give us, that helps support the video and that gives us something to work towards and other ideas for content we can do that you would enjoy. But here we are, as usual. It is me, Peaceful. I am here as Marvel Snap content creator. Good evening, Lammy. How are you doing this? How are you doing?
Hey man, what's up? It's really great today. I can't wait to talk a lot about this topic, which is super close to my heart, and I think it's like really, really important to talk about this when it comes to getting better at competitive Marvel Snap.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of the things that I think sets you apart from a lot of other Marvel Snap players. So the topic we are discussing today is risk management or cube management in Marvel Snap and other card games. And honestly, I know I normally do the topic introduction, but I felt like with this topic, it was better to sort of let you. Why don't you go ahead and walk us through what is risk management, what it means as far as Snap and other card games, and why it's so important.
Right, so I'm gonna be specific to Snap first. Risk management in Marvel Snap is very interesting compared to a lot of other card games because in Marvel Snap you have the ability to just retreat. You can leave a game when it's not in your favor, right? A lot of other card games, when you are losing, you still have to play the game out no matter what because there's no like retreat and try again option. So for Marvel Snap, risk management is a lot about knowing how to manage your cubes, especially in Conquest, knowing how to value your cubes highly, knowing the matchups that you are facing and knowing whether you're favored or unfavored, and then taking appropriate risk when it comes to that matchup, whether it's a favored matchup or an unfavored matchup, you take different kind of risks. And also, yeah, in general, you need to know how to balance whether you are supposed to go in now, go in later, what round is it, because you don't want to like have no cubes in high stakes to snap your opponent, stuff like that. So yeah, it's a little bit about all this kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and it's so important, especially in Conquest, right? That's what we've sort of talked about is, making sure you're managing it so that you have that power to really, win those big rounds later on. So let's go ahead and dive into it in a little bit more detail. What when you're playing in Conquest, how does a particular matchup determine how much you're willing to risk?
Well, let's just use two examples first. So, a favored and unfavored matchup. Let's talk about a favored matchup first. So, a favored matchup in Conquest is basically, or a favored matchup in Marvel Snap in general is basically you want to, you are if you are doing your normal thing at any one point in time, you would normally beat your opponent. Meaning, if like locations don't negatively affect you, or if you're just playing a proper normal game of how your deck's supposed to function versus your opponent's deck, you're on paper you're supposed to beat them. Like I'm gonna use a simple example, like Nimrod Destroy versus like Zabu Dark Hawk. The Nimrod Destroy is generally super favored into the Zabu deck, for example. So that matchup you are very favored as a Nimrod deck. And what does this mean? A favored deck means that you don't really have to take as much risk because on any normal given day you will beat your opponent's deck, which means that you don't have to snap as aggressively. You may not need to stay in like risky 50-50 cube situations. Like, do I play left? Do I play right? If I make the mistake, I lose 8 cubes, that kind of thing. You don't really have to do these kind of stuff because on any given day, playing the normal game in like future rounds should win you the matchup as well. So a favorite matchup for you means that you take less risk by possibly not snapping so much, possibly not staying in like 4 or 8 cuber situations as much because you don't really need to. But then on the flip side, an unfavored matchup is like, let's just flip the coin, flip it around, which is like you are the Zabu Dark Hawk versus a Destroy deck, right? For example, Destroy Nimrod deck, or like you are you're a bounce deck versus like a Sandman Ram deck, that kind of stuff. So these matchups, if you do your normal thing, like you play your normal game plan, you are probably still gonna lose to your opponent, barring locations, player skill, blah blah blah, that kind of stuff like that. So, for unfavored matchups, I feel like you need to really check for choke points, which is basically when your opponent doesn't get to do their best thing at any given point in time, which is like, let's say you're playing a bounce deck, your opponent's playing a Electro Sandman Ram. On turn 3, they don't play Electro, which is the easiest way for them to get out a Sandman on turn 4, right? So if you notice that there is like something like that that does not happen, you might want to snap aggressively against your opponent, because if they have that, you're probably gonna lose. But the fact is they don't. So if on a normal, like on paper situation, you're gonna lose if they have their normal cards, right? You should consider snapping them aggressively when they don't, because that means that there's a chance that they may retreat and you can steal a free cube, steal 2 free cubes. So this is like a little bit about snap mechanics, but also how to manage favored and unfavored matchups, and the risk involved in doing such things. I want to talk a bit about the unfavored matchup a bit more, which is that if you're taking a bit more risk in a certain matchup, there is a chance it backfires and you just die. But like, the reason why you do such things is because on paper you are going to die anyway. So if you know that it's bad for you, might as well just take a bit more risk and hope they don't draw perfectly, and then that puts you ahead with cubes, or like if it's ladder, you just win straight away if you can identify it's a bad matchup, like straight up.
Yep, that's great advice. I think your example is perfect because that matchup is extremely hard to win as the Zabu deck, but I've won it plenty of times just because
Yeah.
my opponent just sticks around for games where they shouldn't stick around for. So make sure you are following Lamy's advice here, not sticking around when you have a bad draw in a favored matchup and stuff like that. So kind of following along with that, what are some of the dangers of being too adverse to taking risks?
Well, so I think this one applies very strongly to unfavored matchups. For favored matchups, being a bit more risk adverse is actually okay, like we mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
because like on any given day, like maybe like 7 out of 10 times, you probably win the round. So you don't really need to take unnecessary like YOLOs or risk, right? But let's say in an
Mhm.
unfavored matchup, if you are still very risk adverse, you tend to give your opponent time to draw the cards they need. Like, okay, let's back to that very standard Sandman ramp example because it's very easy to explain. Let's say they don't. Even now we can talk about Galactus Alive stuff as well. Like, so let's say if they don't have the wave on turn 3, they don't have the Electro on turn 3, and you don't snap them to hopefully get them out of the game, they might get that one more draw on turn 4 to go like wave or Electro on turn 4 into Galactus on, 5,
Yep.
and then you still die to the Alive thereafter. So like, the thing about being too risk adverse when you need to be less risk adverse is that you give them additional time to potentially draw that out to mount the comeback. And if you sense weakness in a bad matchup, you gotta take it, because on, like I said, any normal given day, you should lose that matchup. So being risk adverse in a bad matchup can be actually extra. I mean, you can think of it this way, like, it's a bad matchup, so I gotta be a bit more careful. But the thing is, if you look at it another way, it's a bad matchup, so if I give them time by being more careful, I probably will lose because you let them see more cards.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's an example I can think of in some other games is like when you're playing against like maybe you're an aggro deck in something like Magic or Hearthstone and you don't take the line of like trying to kill them before they can play their big sweeping their cards that kill all your stuff, you're going to lose. And it's the same thing in Snap, right? You got to set yourself up for success and just hope that they don't draw into it, and sometimes they do and you lose, but there's a lot of times where, like you said, you snap them on 3 because they don't have their electro or whatever, and then you end up winning because they just have to leave and they have a bad draw. So great advice.
Yeah, I want to chime in a bit here because it's quite funny. You mentioned Hearthstone and aggro decks. I remember back in the day, when we were playing aggro, we really had to kill them before turn 6 because they would drop Reno Jackson on turn 6, and then you just like you
Yeah,
might just go all in. You just kind of had to go all in sometimes. But yeah, this is a very Hearthstone specific example.
no, oh god, Reno, I was usually the person playing Reno, not the person playing the aggro deck, so I do understand what you're talking about though. Yeah, that's a good one. All right. So, what are some helpful tips we can give to our listeners here to help them put them in a better place to make better decisions when they're trying to factor in risk?
Well, I think at this point I would like to introduce the cube management aspect as well, because we talked a lot about
Sure.
matchups, right? But I think the
Yep.
second most important thing, or like one of the other important things when it comes to race management, is talking about cube management. Cube management is basically, to break it down simply, is that knowing that you need value for your snaps in the high stakes rounds. Because what this means is that in the early rounds you lose 1 cube if you retreat, right? In the high stakes rounds, round 5 onward, you lose 2 cubes at minimum if you retreat. So this kind of compounds. So I'm gonna use a very simple poker analogy here, which is you need a stack to make your all-ins worth anything. Like, let's say your opponent is at 10 health, you're at 3 health. if you snap them for all their cubes, like 3 cubes in high stakes, right? Because you only have 3 left, you can only snap for 3. They are at 10. They're like, oh, 3 times 3, 3 times 3, 3, 3, and then 1. Like, I can lose to you 4 times approx, and I'm still fine. 3 times, and I don't really care, right? Because you don't have enough cubes to snap them back. So I think very importantly, you need to identify outside of favored or unfavored matchups, which is also like, how much cubes do I really need to make my snaps worth anything? You know, like even if it's an unfavored matchup, like somehow they made a mistake and they are like on 2 cubes only, I don't really care if they snap me because like I have 10, you have 2. I can like lose to you 5 times. I have 5 chances to beat you, right? But the thing is, if it's a unfavored matchup for yourself, or any matchup for the matter of the fact, like if it's like something more even, like 5 to 5 cubes, and then your opponent snaps, you'll be like, oh no, if I lose this, I might just lose everything, right? So it's very important to know that going into high stakes, especially, and I feel like every conquest game should generally go into high stakes because that's where most of the action takes place. So you want to really have like at least decent amount of cubes left so that when you snap, they are scared and will consider retreating. Because people will stay with horrible hands if you don't
Yeah.
have cubes to scare them. Like they are just so incentivized to stay with like the most horrible hands ever because you don't have enough cubes worth scaring them as well, right? So, and another thing to note about cube management is also on the flip side, let's say you are in a leading position, right? Just now we keep talking about you are 2 to 10, 3 to 10. What if you are 10 to 3, 9 to 3? If you are like the one ahead, right? This is where we want to talk also about to further add to the point about the being risk adverse thing, which is if you're ahead, I feel like actually proper risk management is knowing that if it's a bad matchup and you're somehow ahead, you're actually supposed to still be a bit aggressive because you don't want to give them time to slowly farm you for 3, for 3, for 3. Because if there's a window of opportunity to just end it there and you are ahead, snap them, end it for them, you know,
Yeah.
especially if it's a matchup that you normally should lose. So I think cube management and matchups knowledge, these two things are the core factors in doing well in like a competitive game of Marvel Snap.
Absolutely. I wanted to add one small note here as far as like a helpful tip. One thing that you have to think about with Snap is that with the size of the decks, them being only being 12 cards and there being 6 turns, you start with 3 cards, you draw 6. So over a normal course of a game, you've drawn 9 of your 12 cards. The likelihood on turn 6 of your opponent having that card that beats you is what? I
Very
think it's like
high.
what, 75% or something like that. So don't go into turn 6 and just say, well, if they don't have it, I win because they probably have it. So that's an example of not using the information at hand, not using what you have. I've won so many games where people just like I guess that's what they did, where they just were like, oh, I guess if they have Eliath, I lose, but I'm just going to play and hope that I win. And then I have Eliath because I've drawn most of my deck, and they just lose. So just something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I want to add a bit to that one as well. Is this one is just human tendency. I feel like a
Mhm.
lot of people are generally calling stations. Like I use the word calling stations, which is it's a poker term once again, which is like they like to see what happens. You know, just like to
Mhm.
see what happens. Like I think it's a bad habit that comes from ladder as well because ladder is a little bit random, right? Like sometimes people just like, oh, I want to see what happens. But like if you're playing competitively, every time you choose to see what happens, you lose an extra cube, 2 extra cubes. And if you cannot, I guess to me the general rule of thumb is that risk management also like a less technical or like less calculated way of looking at this is that if you are staying big but you cannot justify to yourself why you are staying to see an outcome, like you actually cannot figure out what like what's the point of staying here, and your only reasoning is that I want to see what happens, you probably should leave because like you don't have a logical reason as to why you want to see the outcome of this 4 cuber game, because every
Mhm.
cube matters, right? And also on that note, I've heard a lot of times people mention that, oh, it's only 1 extra cube. You should see. Sometimes, yes, but like the thing is that 1 extra cube could put you in a position whereby you are now, instead of 7 to 7 cubes in high stakes, you are 6 to 7 cubes in high stakes. Which means that 1 extra cube that you chose to see gives you a chance to die in high stakes straight up if they snap and you snap back, right? Because
Mhm.
even if they lose, they have 1 left. But if you lose, that's it. Because 6 to 7. So I feel like just staying to see for 1 extra cube is a very dangerous mindset to have, because it will really, really impact your many future games whereby you realize that, oh wait, if I had 1 more cube, I wouldn't die here. I could have just like tried to all in them, snap them for everything, and if I lose, I have this 1 cube to try and fight back, you know. So
Yeah.
very important to note that this whole just stay it's only one cube theory is a little bit. Try not to fall into that trap. Try not to fall
Yeah.
into that trap of it's only one cube. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, like everyone wants to see, but like a lot of the times, like you see your opponent play Electro into, Goblin
I already
into
know, right?
Galactus. Yeah, you know what's coming. Like you know what they have. So like why? Why are you staying other than just like that coin flip of they don't have the cards they put in their deck? I mean, there's you're not staying for anything.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know, stubbornness, curiosity, all those things. You gotta put those things aside if you want to be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one more thing, sorry. I think this is not like a blanket statement whereby you if you actually really don't know, like maybe you're a new player or like you're somehow listening to this and you're like very fresh to Snap. Like if you actually don't know what certain things do or interactions, that's fine. But like I'm saying, if you stay to see just because it's one cube, usually I'm referring to the people that actually like have enough experience and practice and actually already know what's going on, but they just cannot accept that they probably lose. You know, it's a lot of things. Like people
Mhm.
say things like, "I just want to stay and see," but there's a good chance they already know they lost, but they just cannot accept that like it's done, and they just want to like
Mhm.
hopefully not get wrecked by the outcome that they know is there. You know, so this is more towards like people that have experience in the game as well.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, if you're a new player, if you just happen to be listening to this and you haven't played much Snap, especially on ladder and like improving grounds on
Mm-hmm.
Conquest, I actually would recommend to stay until you are
Yeah,
familiar with the play patterns that you can learn. That's
agreed.
good advice. All right. One more question. So we've talked a lot about Conquest and how risk management applies to that. Why don't you give some advice to our players about risk management as far as ladder? So those who might be listening to this who don't prefer Conquest, who would prefer ladder. How does managing risk apply to ladder as opposed to Conquest?
Right. So, firstly, we talked a lot about Conquest in the initial part of the video because I wanted to emphasize like it's like the most important part of risk management is like the most important part of winning in Conquest, like legit the most important part. But also, you'll be surprised or you might not realize this, but like on ladder, risk management is also extremely important, but slightly different because so honestly, when it comes to ladder, it's just think of it like a closed deck list tournament, but it's sample size of not even one match, but one literal round. Sample size of one literal round. So what this means, right, is that the stuff that we talked about realizing what match up you are facing, like is this a favored matchup or is this an unfavored matchup? You kind of need to realize this the moment they play their first card, right? Because that's
Mhm.
is you are not only gonna see the guy, the dude, the lady, or whoever, like one time in the entire uh for however long you're gonna play ladder, right? You're gonna see them one time most of the time. And the moment they play their first card, okay, so some simple examples. They play Queen Jet, and you straight away your mind needs to switch. This is a Loki deck. Or if they play Nebula, this is a high Evo deck. It could be a Galactus deck, you could be wrong, but you have to make an assumption, right? You have to
Mhm.
make an assumption because at the end of the day, you will only see that person for that one round and there's no further rounds to like fight back. So once you see the first card, you make the assumption that it's X deck or whatever, and then you in your mind you straight away decide like, all right, my deck versus this so-called deck that I think they are playing. Am I favored or am I unfavored? If I'm unfavored, uh that's the thing about ladder. You can just retreat. But if you want to play, you need to know that like you still need to have good snapping strategy. You need to be like, oh, okay. So if I'm unfavored and I want to play, then I should snap them aggressively. If this is a electro deck and it doesn't play electro on turn 3, I probably should snap them. That kind of thing. You also need to think like am I favored or unfavored in general in this matchup? But of course on ladder, I think the biggest like flaw with risk management or like the biggest flaw that people like have when it comes to risk management is that it's actually all about just really retreating the bad hands and playing the good hands. Because like it's a sample size of one round and you don't really need to like try to beat up on your opponent like 10 cubes, right? So if it's a bad hand and they snap you, even if you don't know what they are playing, you don't actually really need to stay to figure out. Just like, all right, I'm gonna take the one cube retreat here. On the flip side, if you have a good hand and you snap them and they choose to stay, it's more benefit to you, right? Because they
Mhm.
probably are thinking like, all right, I don't know what they're playing. I just wanna see. And then if your hand is really that good, you're gonna take at least 2 cubes. So ladder is really about curiosity killing the cat, which is like honestly, there's a lot of times that you don't really need to find out what's going on. You just really need to know that, all right, if my hand is bad and they snap, I leave. If my hand is good and they snap, maybe I'll stay, but prepare to leave for 2. don't force yourself to stay for 4 or 8 if you don't have to, because ladder is a numbers game, right?
Mhm.
If you play 100 games, and okay, I don't really know whether this number is correct, but I'm just gonna give an example. Like if you play 100 games and you lose like 60 of the games, but if you lose 60 of the games for 1 cube, but you win 40 of the games for 4 cubes. Okay, I don't really know the numbers, but my point is that even if you lose more games, but when during the games that you win, it's actually more cubes than the like the games that you lost. You tend to have more cubes overall, right? You still get more cubes overall, and then your rank will increase. So like ladder is really just a numbers game of being disciplined. At the end of the day, this whole segment is about like trying to say that on ladder, please be disciplined and like don't try to find out when you don't actually need to find out anything. Just retreat for one, play the next game, maybe you win a 4 or 8.
Yeah, I think bladder is the poker analogy is almost more relevant because you have to be
Yes.
so disciplined every single game. Like if you're staying for games that you know you're probably going to lose, like I see it all the time on like Twitter and like on in like the Discord groups I'm in, people just raging over, and they'll say things like, "Oh man, every time I lose 8 cubes, but when I win, I only get two." And to me, like without being mean to that person, all I think every time is, well, that just means that you are not properly managing the risk that goes into the ladder, and your opponents are, and that's why they're laddering up and you aren't. It's just that
Yeah.
that simple. Like you can. That's the cool thing about Snap that I've always loved is you can hit infinite with like a 40% win rate deck if you
Yes.
know how to play properly.
Yeah. I
It's very
think
unique.
I need to talk about this like human tendency thing also, is that like okay, generally people don't like to lose, right? And like a lot of people view retreating as losing. But actually retreating in Marvel Snap is actually winning if you are not giving your opponent the value that they want to extract from you. Like this is a bit abstract, but it's actually 100% true. So in card games, there's variance. Not every hand you draw is great. Not every hand your opponent draws is bad, right? So sometimes you just cannot win. So let's
Mhm,
say you are playing a game where your opponent's hand is insane. They snap you. They want you to stay for 2, 4, 8. If you retreat for 1, identifying this early enough, you are actually losing 1 cube, but you're not giving them the satisfaction of winning 2, 4, 8, which is actually a loss for them because their hand was good enough to extract 8 from you, but you gave them 1. All right.
mhm.
So if giving them 1 when their hand could get 8, it means that you kind of just won, right? Because that's not giving them 7 extra cubes that they knew they could get, for example. And Marvel Snap is the beauty of Marvel Snap is that doing this thing over a significant sample size, like retreating so your opponent doesn't extract cubes from you, and playing hard when your hand is good so you can extract cubes from them. Overall, you net gain cubes, and that is actually the actual winning in Marvel Snap. Marvel Snap is winning over the long game, not just like definitely having to win this 8 cuber for less than a 50% chance.
Exactly. People always think of the negative side of things, but when you retreat for one, that means you don't have to retreat later for four.
Yes.
I mean, that's good math. Yeah, I agree. Retreating is like one of the coolest things about Snap, like the whole cube system. We've talked about it before. It's what makes Snap so ingenious as a game. But it's also like you said, I think people have this mentality from other games where, oh, if I leave, I lost. And it's just
Mhm.
you can't think like that because you're gonna not retreat when you should retreat a lot of times. All right, well, we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up. Lammy, why don't you kind of summarize everything for us and kind of what should be people's takeaway from this episode on risk management?
Right. So, firstly, this topic is super, super important when it comes to getting better at Marvel Snap. There's actually even more stuff which we can cover in like a different video. But like at the base level, at the start, this is like the basics of risk management in Marvel Snap. To summarize, firstly, favored or unfavored matchups, knowing when you should be more risk adverse or less risk adverse based on like what your opponent is playing versus what you are playing. You need to know how the flow of the matchups go, and the only thing you can really like do to know this is practice a little bit more so you know what's your shot in a particular matchup. Secondly, cube management. You need your cubes to matter. Basically, when you snap, your opponent needs to be scared, right? And the only way for them to be scared is you have enough cubes to actually scare them, right? If you're snapping with 2 cubes left and they have 10, no one cares. I can lose 5 times. But if you're snapping with 5 cubes left and they have 10, they will be a bit scared because if they lose this one, it's now even 5-5, and then they could lose again and die. So always consider like whether you have enough cubes to snap and whether your snaps scare them because you need enough cubes to actually make that matter. And last but not least, I would say especially for ladder tendencies and like human tendencies, if you are staying in a round and you don't know why you are staying, it's probably better to just leave because you can't justify to yourself as well what's the point of this stay. Staying to see what happens is not a good like habit to have.
No.
Other than if you're a new player and you actually don't really know the interaction, a lot of people they stay to see what happens, even though they know they kind of already lost. Like you see the flow of the game from turn 1 to 5, you kind of know what they are playing, you kind of know what's their end game. But if you stay to see what happens, it's just trying to tell yourself that like copiuming that they don't have the out. And like Peaceful mentioned, 75% of the time they probably have it because it's a 12 card deck in Marvel Snap. So knowing when you are beat is very important when it comes to risk management, and also realizing that retreating is not actually losing. Retreating when you could be losing 4 or 8 cubes and only giving them 1 or 2 is a win in your book because their hand was good enough to destroy you. Not letting them completely destroy you and fighting again another day is actually the winning strategy.
Absolutely. Good stuff. All right. Remember, we are going to be doing these every week. If you want to see this kind of content, make sure you are subscribed, like the video, let us know what other topics you want to see. Lammy, thank you as always. It is a blast. I learned so much doing these with you, and I guess I'll see you next week.
Thank you. See you guys.